Another strong partnership that we're very proud of, that I know that Deb Miles will be developing with you very soon, is our partnership with Strong Behavioral Health. It's unique in itself. One of the partners that we have embraced, well, since I've been here, and I've been here for 13 years, we partnered with Dr. James Wallace from the Strong Behavioral Health Child and Adolescent Psychiatrist Unit. He's been a strong partner. When complicated issues arise, we turn and we partner and collaborate with the experts. And we've been learning with Dr. Wallace and his team in a very close sense the past couple of years. But it's been a long partnership, and we appreciate that. So right now I'm going to invite Dr. Wallace to come up, and he's going to speak to you from his lens on the social emotional well-being of our students. Dr. Wallace.
I gotta be careful. Things happen, you know? So I'm really proud of you baseball fans, you country music fans, right? For being here tonight. I'll try to get you home for the fourth inning. Let's see here. You're all thinking, I know, push that button, push that button. So I'm a child psychiatrist. I've been in the community now 26 years, I guess, and I worked somewhere else before, so I've been down this road a while, and I've worked with lots of schools. The two things I do right now is I push into primary care offices and to schools because I feel that child psychiatry services have to come closer to where kids live instead of always being at the hospital or in the clinic. So, you know, I welcome the opportunity to kind of start to be involved with Fairport schools, but you know, if you've been around, I've worked with many different schools. So I wanted to talk about this. I've entitled this talk several different things, but now I call it emotional regulation: how tantrums become passions. And the idea is that, you know, the emotions that kids experience can be overwhelming when they're young, but they're important. And because what we try to do is help them over time, turn them from these tantrums and meltdowns and overwhelming kind of toxic experiences into the passion and intensity that they need to, you know, enjoy life and to be successful and to take on the rigors of life that they're going to have to face. So, you know, the idea is that the emotions that kids feel are not a problem. They are just overwhelming sometimes. So, you know, people have to learn to regulate them. You certainly would not want to go into adulthood not having had a certain amount of emotional roller coastering because you're going to have a lot of strong experiences as an adult too. So you have to get ready. You have to build that resilience and strength. So this is the beginning part. This is what I'm talking about. You know about tantrums. You know that we all have them hidden away inside of ourselves. We just try to keep a lid on them most of the time. It's not a good thing. Being overwhelmed emotionally is contagious in family systems. It's contagious in peer groups. It's contagious at staff meetings, all sorts of places. So anybody can go there. When you see someone melting down, sometimes we distance ourselves from that experience, but if you think about it in your heart of hearts, you could be there, right? You could be there. And so it happens to all sorts of people. There it is, right? You know the feeling? Oh, it's terrible. So I diagram this a little bit because one of the things I try to do when I'm teaching people is I use analogies and diagrams all the time. That's kind of what I do. So this is my diagram of the red zone, which is kind of an emotional meltdown, right? So over here is how you show up. Number one is like you show up. You come to school, you get off the bus, right? Well, you don't get off the bus at neutral if you just got, yelled at by the bus driver, or if you just got teased by another kid, or if you know that in second period you have this gigantic test and you're already starting, you didn't sleep well the night before. So, one of the things we think about is where are they at number one? And can we get them, at a pretty good place so there's a buffer between them and a meltdown? And if, so a lot of the things that happens to the families we know is they don't come in at their baseline, they come in already halfway up. So they don't have a lot of resilience to face up to the stressors that they're going to experience. Number two are the triggers. What are triggers? In my mind, there are two kinds of triggers. There are triggers that are a normal part of life, right? Like you have to turn off your computer and go to bed, right? That can be a trigger. But you got to do it eventually, right? You have to pick up your room. You have to do some homework. You have to, little kids, you have to transition. It's time to, it's time to come in from the playground, right? So all those things are triggers, but those are mostly like normal life triggers. And we really can't protect kids from those very much, right? Because that's just going to happen. Now, triggers that are huge, like, trauma, or really getting intensely bullied, or getting, harassed, or sexually assaulted. I mean, those are a different flavor of trigger, and those we should do our best to protect kids from experiencing. So those are like the toxic triggers. And then there are triggers that are just everyday life. And, you can have the same kind of meltdown for either one. So I try to help parents say, I can't avoid the regular stuff. We can avoid the nasty stuff, but the regular stuff, the kid has to figure out some way to figure out how to line up without losing it. And we're not going to stop asking them to line up. That's not reasonable. In some kids, number three is how quickly they escalate, right? How quickly they go from 0 to 100. In some kids, you can see it and it's kind of unfolds slowly, and then you can intervene and try to avoid it, right? That underlying, what you want is for people to get upset but to stay in control. So that's the line, is you stay under control. Now the red zone is when you don't stay under control, right? When the little volcano in your head overwhelms you and you regress. You regress, and I go to the schools all the time, and they tell me these long drawn-out stories about how this kid regresses, and they're all the same story, right? They're all the same story. They regress, they get immature, they spit and fuss and kick, and sometimes they swear, and sometimes they strike out, and they lose their language skills, and they lose their problem-solving skills, and they lose control, basically. And it's ugly. And then when it's all over, they calm back down again, and their brain turns back on in a normal way, and you have the person is back. And sometimes they can talk about it, and sometimes they can't. Sometimes it actually is such a meltdown that they don't remember. I mean, so when kids say they don't remember, sometimes they really don't remember. If you are hyper aroused, your ability to lay down memory is not that great, and everything gets a little distorted. So that's kind of true. So anyhow, that's the anatomy. So this is interesting. So you think, well, that's, the red zone is nothing but bad, right? Well, who's smiling? Right? There's something attractive about the red zone, right? Something about it draws us to it. You know you shouldn't do it, but you do it, right? I mean, how many people might get in a fist fight today in Chicago, right? Right? And how many people are going to get, have several beers to increase the possibility of that happening? Cleveland too. And you would think, well, obviously that's a bad idea. It's a very bad idea. But there's something joyful in melting down. There's something attractive. If you read the case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the most interesting part of it is, why does he keep drinking this stuff, right? When he drinks it, he turns into a monster, he kills people, he feels terrible, and then a few days later he wants to do it again, right? So one of the things you have to remember with children too is that they don't just have a meltdown and say, oh my gosh, that was the worst experience of my life. Sometimes they don't think that, right? They think that kid was a real jerk, right? They externalize the responsibility. And so one of the things we have to do is don't jump and assume that everybody wants to stop having meltdowns. The other thing we have to be careful of is we reinforce it accidentally sometimes. So if you're in math class and you're facing your quiz and you flip out and you start bugging somebody, the teacher speaks to you, you have an outburst. So what happens is you get removed from the classroom, you don't have to take the quiz, and they send you to the most pleasant person in the building, right? They call up one of the nice people, and they come hang out with you a little bit and help you calm back down again. Well, that's probably a good idea to get out of your crisis, but that's very reinforcing. So we have to be careful sometimes of how we go about things, because we don't mean to reinforce it, but we kind of do sometimes. So don't assume that meltdowns are something that people don't want to have all the time. They sometimes do, and we have to help them figure out that it's really not a good idea and it causes a lot of trouble. So this is how the brain looks. This is the inside part where all the action is. This is where the volcano is. I won't go into any details. This is the outside that tries to keep a lid on it. But I like diagrams, so I think it's better to look like that. So you have the volcano, which is the limbic system, where all the passions and all the emotions are. And when you're a kid, that's pretty powerful, right? It's pretty intense. And that's why if you know, babies, it doesn't take much, and they just start wailing. And they get overwhelmed very easily. And then as we get a little bit older, we get a little better at it. Right? We try to get better at it. And then this cap that we try to use is the more sophisticated parts of our brain are late to be developed, and they come along, unfortunately, they kick in a little bit better in their mid-20s than they do in their mid-teens. And so you're always trying to strengthen that. When I'm working with families, I draw this all the time. Even when I'm thinking about, well, you want to give somebody medicine for anxiety or depression, and you want to treat their ADHD, well, one of my questions is, how is this working for you? And if that volcano is just too hot every day, so it just keeps blowing the top off everything, then that's not really good. And so you try everything you can to teach them skills and you teach them strategies. But when you're in the red zone, skills and strategies tend to disappear, right? They tend to just slip away. So sometimes you have to treat kids to just bring this down to something a little more manageable, so then they can start to use the skills and practice, because when the volcano wins, those skills, you might as well save your breath, right? I know many kids who could teach a course in the skills, but they cannot use them in the midst of a tantrum, right? It's not like they don't know them. So this is one reason for this. So this is the connection between your frontal lobe, right? These are the tracks that connect the rest of the brain to the frontal lobe. And if you look at the white stripe there, that is adolescence, right? So people are starting to gather up some speed in that. But you can see you reach your maximum at around age 25. And if you think back to your college years, if you went to college when you were 24 instead of when you were 18, you think it would have been a different experience, right? You think you would have made different decisions and had different friends and had different activities on weekends? Of course you would, because the problem is that doesn't kick in until we're done with colleges. So that's why kids in college can still have a lot of trouble. But when we're expecting young children to have very good self-regulation, one of the things I try to remind them and their families is that this will get better. Their ability to control these outbursts will get better over time, and I hope it'll get good enough so a lot of the heroics we have to do to get them through their childhood and adolescence won't be necessary. These skills will come to them, and we have to keep helping them. But one of the problems is one of the most important regulation skills or functions that we have in our body doesn't really mature until we're about 25. There is no shortcut. There just is no shortcut. One of my sons, brilliant young man, pain in the butt, and he, my wife got like, he's going to have a terrible life. I'm like, no, he's not going to have a terrible life. He's fine. He's just a jerk, and he'll stop. And he'll stop being a jerk when he gets a little older. And she's like, why would he do that? I'm like, just trust me. It'll go away. And he's the sweetest man. He's married. He's in grad school. He's fine. He was fine. I was right for once. I was right. But he would spout off at us. He would snap at his mother all the time, and he was nasty and surly, and he was hard to be around and hard to have a conversation with. So it's just like he wasn't there. It's amazing because he was really, really smart, and he probably got 5 on the AP psychology. But it didn't matter, right? He knew it, but he couldn't use it. He couldn't do it again. In fact, he didn't even know what we were talking about. I said, you could be a little more kind, you could be a little more, just hold back some of those thoughts and comments that you make, and our life would go a lot better. And he really didn't know what I was talking about until he was about 25. All right, so when it gets a little better, right? So now, it's still there though. You still have, now instead of a baseball cap, you've got a little helmet. And the volcano shrunk a lot, right? So this is what eventually you hope for people, that they still have their passions and their feelings, but they have some control over them. And so the challenge is we can't wait around for kids to be 25 when you have them in school, right? So if you're an elementary teacher, that does you no good, right? No good at all. So you can tell families, hang in there because things will change, but you still have to get them through 4th grade, or you have to get them through middle school. So then the question is, what do we do? Again, this connection is so important to the frontal lobe because a lot of our perspective and practical planning and sequential thinking, like if I do this, then this is going to happen, and then this third thing is going to happen, and this, I better not do that, right? So in our frontal lobes, it's a very amazing part of our brain. We can practice things in our head, right? So you can practice something without doing it. Very few actually species in the world can actually do this. So we can imagine if I say that in this meeting, this person's going to hear it, and that'll probably trigger this reaction, so I better not say that until I get into this other meeting. So when we're asking kids to figure out how on earth you get through the cafeteria line with people taunting you a little bit, they have a hard time, like, that's just too complicated. There's too many steps, right? And one of the things parents get frustrated all the time is you cannot coach your kids very much on social interaction because there's so many details to it, you just can't see it all coming. So you say, well, how should a kid be on the school bus? And I'm like, who knows? You should just take a nap or something. So if they're trying to chit-chat and joke around and they're trying to handle the bullying, they're trying to be careful with the bus driver who's in a bad mood or something, it's treacherous. It's a very tricky thing to do. And they really don't have all those skills. Some of them luck out and are pretty good at it, but it never surprises me when they blunder. All right. So what do? When you're trying to help kids to regulate themselves, you're trying to do a couple things. You're trying not to overwhelm them because every time we trigger the volcano, they don't really get much out of the red zone experiences. They don't really get much out of it. It's not something that you want to just like, we'll just see what happens. I mean, sometimes you can't avoid them, but it's not really that productive. Because you say and do things you regret, right? Every time you get in an argument with your spouse and you cut loose, right? It's never a good idea. It is never, trust me, I've been married a long time. It's never good. You clear, but you speak your mind, but it's not a good idea. You just can't, you have to be a little bit careful in that. So you don't want to go overboard, right? And so a lot of times what we can do is we can model. So if you model how to regulate yourself, so if you're a teacher and you have students that taunt you in some sort of way, frustrate you, how you handle that, how you use language, how you use your nonverbal communication, your posture, and your tone of voice, all those things, you got a big audience watching how you're going to regulate yourself. And, and even what the comment you might make, whether you get sarcastic, whether you get aggressive, whether you get into the red zone with that kid who's taunting you or not, you've got a big audience watching that, and our job is to be good role models. We're supposed to do a good job of this. So I think in some ways, more than being trained in how to help kids de-escalate, we have to be experts in keeping ourselves under control and using more sophisticated skills that people can watch and learn from, because they learn a lot from that. The modeling is huge. And it's also this like Goldilocks and Three Bears things. They need freedom and constraint, right? So you need to have, so you need to be there and not just let things go crazy, right? But you also have to let people breathe and grow and experiment and make mistakes. And it's this kind of awkward balance. And the tricky part is most of us are a little bit better at one than the other, right? We're pretty good at being laissez-faire and letting kids kind of do what they want to do, or we're pretty good at structuring them. Not many of us are good at both of these things. And so you have to always keep yourself in check. That you don't want to represent just one half of this, and people can get polarized and have a lot of trouble with this. And trying to be the person who can kind of tightrope that freedom and constraints sort of balance is very challenging. So who has trouble regulating themselves? Well, if you got anything, you have trouble regulating themselves. It's such a difficult skill. So anybody with a mood or anxiety disorder, certainly anybody who's a brain injury of any kind, Demented people get a lot more volatile and reactive when they get older. People that are intoxicated, it's no accident that people get in brawls and stuff like that. Because if you get intoxicated, you're much more likely to not regulate yourself. You basically, you kind of wipe out your frontal lobe when you drink, if you drink enough. The first drink, your mood goes up a little bit. About the fourth drink, your frontal lobe stops functioning. And the first thing it stops doing is telling you not to have another drink, right? And that's how people get in so much trouble. They start off thinking, I'm only having a couple tonight, but you forget that very quickly. So kids that have sources of frustration, language impairment, intellectual handicap, learning disability, they go to school every day and they face more frustration than their peers. And so they are more likely to be triggered because they have more triggers. They walk through their life with more triggers than the average kid. Same with sensory impairment, deaf, hard of hearing, blind, visually impaired people. They struggle because they sometimes don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, so they're frustrated. They can't tell what's going on. They can't intervene how they want to. And obviously, little kids. All right. So what can you do to try to help them? Well, a lot of kids have warning signs. I don't know how many times I heard parents say their ears turn red, right? Their ears turn red, they're starting to bubble over. Kids get looks, right? They stop blinking, they flush, they get quieter, they start to, growl, or they do all these things, and they give us some warning signs. So if you're a teacher, the problem is you're playing chess with 30 people at the same time. You're trying to read the warning signs with a lot of people, and you didn't notice Junior back there in the back row. So you have to get really good. That's why at the beginning of the year, luckily the kids give us a break because they have a little honeymoon at the beginning of the year. But it gives the teachers a chance to kind of figure all these kids out. And of course it's harder when you get to junior high school because you have so many kids, right? It's not, you don't have 30 kids to learn, you have 30 kids every 40 minutes. So you multiply that all out, and now you have this big group. Or you learn from people. If you struggle with a student, or if you're a parent struggling with a child, talk to somebody who has some success with them. Talk to a teacher who they like and they get along with, and vice versa. Because sometimes there's something about that person that you say, oh, I could do more of that. I could be a little bit more like them. And the fact that the two adults talk to each other is actually very powerful for the child too. I don't know how many times I've called a non-custodial parent, and the fact that I had called them, when I tell the kid, oh, I talked to your father. And they're like, what? Talk to your father? It's just the whole idea that I talked to them ties their life together in a way that wouldn't happen if I didn't. So sometimes you can say, oh, I talked to Mr. Jones, your gym teacher, who you like so much. And he said, whenever he asks you to line up, you don't have any problem with that, you joke around with him, and you like that. That's really great to hear. It's fun to talk to him, and he really enjoys you. You got any ideas about how we can make it more like that around here? So just trying to kind of use the other people's, what they learn. It's like putting, right? You watch somebody putt, and then they read and read, and you try to do the same thing. And you got to build relationships. So this is, in child psychiatry, I don't even care if all you're doing is med bending and stuff. I said there is no such thing. It's all about relationships. If anybody's going to listen to you, if anybody is going to take something that you prescribe, if anybody's going to follow advice that you give, if they think you're okay, they might do it. If they don't like you, they're not going to do it. So I tell the fellows I work with, when somebody takes medicine that I prescribe, I consider they're taking a little piece of me. And if they like me, they're not going to choke out, right? They're going to be like, okay, all right, he's an all right guy. But if I tick them off somehow or other, especially if you got a teenager, what are the chances, right? How are you going to get that down? Because it's got my name on it, we talked about it, it reminds them every time of what they're doing, and it's, so your relationship is gigantic. So it doesn't really matter. You have to know the content of child psychiatry, but if you don't have the interpersonal skills to convince people to do what you think they should do to get healthy, you might as well go home. It just doesn't do any good. Unfortunately, there are some around. So relationships are everything. So what can you do? You try to be calm and empathic. And calm and firm are the hardest two words in the human language to keep together, right? So, the problem is we tend to be calm or we tend to be firm. We don't tend to do both at the same time. So if you're trying to be like the Uber parent of the century, what you try to do is you try to parent when you're still calm. And so your kids will learn to hear you when you're calm because it matters. If they know that we can ignore you until you start screaming, because nothing doesn't really count until you raise your voice to a certain decibel, then they'll ignore you until you scream. So if you want kids to hear you when you're speaking calmly, then it has to matter. So you can intervene, or you can give a consequence, or you can, tell them something or other in a calm voice, and they need to listen to that because it matters. And that's partly our doing it, whether we can keep ourselves in a place where we can actually think and communicate with our kids, or if we wait too long before we act when in our role as a parent, and then it becomes loud and exaggerated. The other thing is to communicate. Some of the messages out on the tables that people are talking about is, communication is one great tool. One thing it does is you communicate with the helmet, right? You communicate with the higher levels of your brain, right? So when you ask someone to put something into words, you're saying, could you turn down the volcano a little bit and turn up the helmet a little bit? Because I want you to tell me what's going on. I want you to put it into words. And you're actually physiologically asking them to cool things off and to use language. And it's a very powerful thing to do. And if you help them to get to the words, and they can then express themselves better, it helps to de-escalate. So one of my last kind of themes is value-driven boundaries and stuff like that. So one of the things as a parent, I had to learn this over time, is that, kids should know why you want them to do things. And we have some responsibility to explain ourselves and not just be a top-down kind of leader. Because the problem is, then you're asking them to just comply. And just complying is not really what you want your kids to grow up to do, right? You want them to think, and you want them to reason, you want them to... So you want them to comply, but they should comply because the reason we're pushing them to do something is because we love them, we care about them, and we want something good for them, not because we like to argue with them. So when you're trying to get that kid to turn off the video game, you should really lead with, I really care about you and I want you to be a healthy person, and I've read a lot about how important it is for kids to get enough sleep. That's where I'm coming from, So the problem is when I try to get you to turn it off, you get upset, I get upset, and nobody gets any sleep. So what are we going to do? How are we going to solve this problem? Because all I want is for you to get a good night's sleep. I don't want to go to war with you. I don't want to be your boss. I don't want to make rules. I hate rules. But I want you to sleep enough. So what can we do? And you say you're going to have to, let's plug all of our phones in along here at night, and at 10 o'clock they're all off. Because we all need to sleep, so let's just do it as a routine. And you have to figure out, so it's okay to say, give me your phone, and you got to turn off all this stuff at 10 o'clock, whatever it is. But if you do it in a value-driven way, then you make it transparent why you want them to do this, right? Not just because I want to be your boss, but because I want you to have a good night's sleep so you're healthy. So I think we have to be more transparent about our values. And then kids don't have as much of a ground to argue with us. They still will, of course, but they don't have quite as much. And you have to listen empathically. There's an activity I do sometimes with therapists. The doctors, by the way, are terrible at listening, in case you didn't know that already. Which is creepy, right? Because they're making all these decisions and they're doing all this stuff. But one of the problems is they tend to formulate quickly, right? You learn how to formulate. So they're closing in on what's going on too soon before they hear what you say sometimes. And so one of the things you can do in practice is to not do that, to try to listen and have a conversation where you are not trying to think of what you're going to say next. You're just listening to the other person. It's extremely difficult to do, actually, but it's an interesting activity. So we have to learn how to actually listen to a person and not just think about what we're going to say. We're so quick to be scripting in our mind what we're going to say next. We don't even hear what they're saying. Carrying contacts, that's one thing that you kind of mentioned. One of the assets is, teenagers need adults to be approachable. They really do. They need a lot of approachable adults, and millions of them. They need the cafeteria ladies, they need the bus monitors, they need the hall monitors, they need the study hall monitors, they need their math teacher, the gym teacher, everybody needs to be as personable as possible. So you're approachable because maybe it doesn't matter today, but maybe one of those kids is kind of searching about for someone they feel they can tell some important secret to, or some important thing. And they're kind of trying out all the adults they know. And they're looking for people they think are approachable and will be respectful of what they have to say. And I think we should all try to be that person. I mean, you don't want to, I don't know about those calls late at night or anything like that, but, I think you want to be, someone says, do you have a minute? I think you want to stop and say, oh my gosh, this is that magical moment. Somebody asked me if I had a minute. How cool is that? And really respect that. And then don't think about what you're going to say, but just listen. Just listen and trust yourself that you'll come up with something to say at the end. And I think we sometimes are too quick and like, math class is over, get out of here. I got to get ready for the next group. You're supposed to be down the hall, you're 2 minutes late, all this kind of stuff happens. And even in therapy, there's some talk about what they call soft termination. So if you're going to see a therapist and you stop seeing them, that you have some access to them afterwards. It doesn't have to be like, never call me for the rest of eternity. But maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe that's not realistic. And we say, if you need something, call me, I'll help you figure out where to start. I don't know if I can see you or not, but at least you can call me and I'll sort it out because we worked together for 3 years or something like that. And people don't want to start with a stranger. They want at least to get advice. So if you say, I know this person, they're a good person, that's really powerful. So that's very helpful. So building softer systems of caring confidence, I just think those are things that we can do as adults. Now, you probably had all sorts of trainings, right? It depends where you work and where you go. But it's all kind of the same, but a big part of it is to build relationships, right? And to be careful about your own feelings and to have a plan. Because if you don't have a plan, then the meltdowns will be contagious. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. This is my last slide. And sometimes, I don't have time right now, but sometimes I have actually people come up and stand along the line here and say, listen, what do you think, your personality, do you think you're more of a rigid, high expectation, kind of rule-governed person, or do you think you're more of a nicey-nicey, accommodating, bend over for anybody kind of person? And if you take 7 people, they'll put themselves along a spectrum, right? And some people are just naturally more one way or the other. And that's perfectly fine, right? It's perfectly fine. You should know who you are, right? You should know where you fit on this. And because it means what efforts you're going to have to make. So then if you have a child that you're trying to work with, and what that child needs on a given day is somewhere along this spectrum, right, between accommodation and high expectations, then somebody might actually line up with them, but most of us are not going to line up with that person. Most of us are going to have to bend a little bit. And we're either going to have to be a little more lenient than we normally are, or we're going to have to be a little more firm than we normally are. We're not going to just be able to sit in our comfort zone and say, this is me, this is who I am. Well, that's not how you work with teenagers. All day long, I'm a chameleon, right? I'm a chameleon. I change every hour of the day into whatever they need me to be. And it's not, so sometimes I'm Mr. Nice Guy, and I joke around. Sometimes I'm more strict, and I kind of bark at people a little bit. I'll do whatever I think they need me to do, and I try not to be too burdened by my natural tendencies. Which is hard. It's hard to do, and it's stressful, right? If they happen to need exactly where I'm comfortable, that's an easy out. That's great, right? And that happens every century or so, right? It happens. So I have an easy out. So you have this and so when you're trying to do it, in the middle is this just right amount of accommodations and limits. And I don't know how many times I have meetings with schools that we get polarized, right? So if you take a husband and wife, or you take a school and a family, or you take a therapist and a school administrator, you take any 2 people you want, and they're going to not probably be exactly on the same spot, right? Which is cool. And so, but the problem is, if they witness the other person interacting with the child, they get annoyed, right? So then they exaggerate their traits. So if you happen to be a rule-governed person, and you have a kid who you think is kind of a punk, and somebody's being all nicey-nicey to them, you're like, I hate that. But, we're going to ruin these kids, we got to have some rules here. And so you might be a little more strict with that kid than you would have been otherwise. right? And then that other person watched you do that, and they're like, oh, that was so mean, right? That was so mean, I can't believe you're doing it. You know, so they exaggerate, so we get polarized. So they didn't start that different from each other, but over time you can become more different, and what happens is the adults set up all these smoke screens and get all tangled up in their polarization. The kid lays low and does not get any benefit from either one. So what the key is, what the kid needs is for both of those people to move towards them, and what our tendency is to react to each other and move away from each other. And we got to be careful not to do that. So this is a very interesting activity if you want to have a team activity, is to kind of figure out where you fit along here, and then how you react to other people, and kind of in your mind think about that, and then see if you can kind of alter it a little bit, try to kind of manage those urges. So, question, by the way, the last thing is very important. I don't have a practice anymore, so don't bother calling. But, you know, do you have any questions specifically for me? And then there's lots of questions that have come to the panel. Oh, we'll wait for the panel, because I'll be on the panel, so I can just take it down, right? So write down your questions. There's going to be people walking up and down the aisles that gather them, and we will have a nice panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wallace. So from a school administrator to a parent and husband, gave you lots to think about too. So thank you.